Well, I'm going to look at engine mounts today. What's that here? Screams of excitement? No, I didn't think so. So, right. I'm going to look at the mounting points because it's a PD engine that came out. PD engine going in. So, in theory, you think the mounts are in the same place. But are they? That's the question. Now, I ran this car low. It's not as low as some, but it was lower than standard. So, the way I had it was, obviously, there's no chassis notch. But you could see where this was kind of making contact on some bumps. Something I need to address at a later date. But because that was low, I needed to space the PD engine up. So I used some machine spacers, which was give me a 25mm lift or an inch, depending on kind of how old you are, how you measure it. But they basically sat kind of on there, which would lift the original engine mount, obviously by that amount up. Same on the gearbox side, so that was kind of how that was done. So obviously, in retrospect, the car dropped, say, 25mm, actually quite a bit more than that, but the engine lifted 25mm, and that was primarily just to protect the aluminium sump. If ever you've kind of lowered one of these Lupos or Arosas with an alloy sump on, you'll know it's not a great idea, the amount of times I've had to put new sumps on previously. So I learned by this one to literally space it as soon as possible. So yeah, that's kind of the way I had it originally set up. But then it makes me kind of question then, is there any reason of following kind of what other people have done and cutting this mat out entirely to then weld a crude bit of plate from here to here? I don't think there is. I think we can reuse this. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that's the case. So the way I'm going to work out if I need to reuse this is annoyingly going back and comparing everything on both engines and the mounting system that I'm choosing to use. Right, so this is the donor engine, and just to show you, obviously all the mounts annoyingly are different. So this is the 1.9 ASZ from the PD130 VW VRS. This one is the one out of the Golf, same engine, but as you'll see, if I roughly chuck those in, you'll see instantly that there's a difference in the top heights of these mounts. So the Fabia one, because I'm not using the Fabia top mount, I'm going to obviously remove the bracket, which is the aluminium, off of that engine. And the Golf one is kind of the one which goes with this mount. So we're going to use this for referencing, which then brings me on to the original kind of engine. Now this obviously sat in the position that I want, obviously the new engine to sit in. So I've got to kind of compare the Golf setup now with the original Lupo setup, which is the Lupo PD or Lupo diesel setup. While we're swapping them out over, the other thing you need to note is the cam cover plastics are going to need to be swapped over. That's the middle and the top, because they differ very slightly. Obviously the tension of the cam mount runs the same between the 1.9 and the 1.4 PD, but just the shape of the bracket that goes in will mean that I'll need to take this plastic off of here, the top plastic, and swap it over, which is perfect because it means I've got a brilliant cam cover. I've not got to have bits kind of missing and stuff, because obviously you can see the 1.9, because the mount was different, you'll see the difference. So yeah, basically these plastics can be taken off of this engine and popped onto here and then the mount, which is what I'm going to do now. Right, just a note on the plastics of the 1.9, you could change the rear, but the only kind of bit of a pants job, to be honest, you've got to take the cam wheel off. Obviously this front wheel comes out, but you need to then take the actual whole pulley off to get it out from memory. So instead of doing that, the quickest way I'm going to do it, and you'll see why, like it fits perfectly bar, there's an extra piece of plastic at the back on the 1.9, so that would sit on there, and obviously you can see that would push down and it would sit perfectly in the trim. But then there's this extra piece of plastic here, so what that needs is that needs to be cut dead straight. Now you can use a grinder, you obviously be careful if you use a grinder, but you can use a grinder, a saw, etc. Just cut that straight and then the plastics will mount up perfectly. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to do it with a grinder because I'm lazy, and then I'm going to get the 1.4 plastics on. Right, engine mounts are laid out. Now I'm going to work out kind of the positioning of the mounts. Now I think this is going to sit far forward, but the way I'm going to do it, I'm just going to crudely eyeball it. I'm going to drop this on top, and what I'm using as the reference point is going to be these front holes here. So I'm going to just drop something through that's long. I mean, again, this is eyeballed, this isn't obviously perfect, but you should be able to kind of instantly see. Obviously they're pretty much lined up with the holes. You can instantly see that this space is off slightly further forwards, which will mean what we need to do is we need to modify the bracket in the engine bay, which we were going to have to do anyway, whether that's a bolt-on panel that bolts onto it or whether I'm just going to cut the top and weld it on. We'll have a quick look in a minute. I did notice, however, the gearbox side, pretty much if you do the same thing, it sits in the same place, pretty much in 3 places. So you've got your 2 top holes here, which line up perfectly, obviously it's the same, and then 1 hole here lines up, but the other one's out. It's out. So you could get 2 gearbox ones, to be honest, 2 Mark IV gearbox mounts and use that. The reason I'm going to kind of just use the original setup, which is obviously the driver's side engine mount, the gearbox top, and then obviously I'm going to fabricate the gearbox bottom. So I'm going to use that because you can buy them as a set and they work out cheaper as a set. If you're going to buy them as singles, I probably at this point would opt for 2 gearbox ones, which is this one here, just because the brackets on the top's better. There's no kind of offset with it. As you can see, it's central. That is literally central to that. Whereas obviously on the engine side, you'll see from looking at the top, it offsets it quite a lot. So yeah, that's kind of how I'm going to do that. I'm going to show you quickly on the engine bay where I think it's going to sit. So as far as the engine side at the minute, what I'm going to do is I'm going to unbolt kind of this bracket off of here. I'm going to bolt it onto the original engine mount that's on the 1.4, and then we're going to chuck it in like that. So right, this is the original engine mount, ignoring the spacer. Ignore the spacer at this stage. So lining up the mount with the original holes, which is, I've gone blind, there's 1 hole, there's another hole, and whether you can see it or not, I can, the rear hole's done. So the original mount doesn't actually sit where it's supposed to sit. It sits kind of on a bit of a wonky angle, but that is how it sits OEM. So I now know if I do my mounts and they're on a wonky angle, then it's OEM. So that's always a bonus. So yeah, that's kind of sat where that is. There's a bit of a space off there, which is fine. So I'm going to take that off, and then we're going to look at the Golf one. Now the Golf one, if it was going to sit properly, it would sit kind of, let me just line up that front hole. It would sit kind of like that. But the problem with the Golf one is obviously it spaces the engine back, which we discovered a minute ago. So it's got to kind of sit in that position, but we've got to kind of space it further forwards like this. It's kind of going to be like this, which is fine. It means we're going to have good access to put something in here to get a bolt on. Right, engine it's on a crane, just roughly chucked in at the minute, just kind of to have a look at what needs doing on the gearbox side. Now, as you can see, this is obviously with the 1.4 stuff. The engine needs rotating backwards a little bit. So obviously the top needs to go back and the bottom needs to go forwards. That's kind of, it needs rotating. But to give you a rough idea, we'll have good clearance on that side, no chassis mods required. This side, bear in mind, this is a 6-speed box. It probably would have cleared, to be honest. It might need a very, very slight notch on here. So what I'm going to potentially do is I'm going to just see, I'm going to put some bigger steel in than factory, and I'm just going to probably notch that very slightly. But yeah, to be honest, it doesn't look like there's a massive amount of work that needs to be done to get a 6-speed in. I know a lot of people say, oh, you need 5-speed, you need 5-speed. 6-speed I'd rather have, because obviously I've got a smaller wheel, so I've gone for the longer ratio box out of the VRS, which is why I had that as a starting point, because it's a sought after box. The only annoying thing with that box is I can't use a standard O2M short speed shifter, because it's a 08A or a 088, can't remember exactly. But yeah, it's a slightly different mechanism, because the gate is actually on this part rather than in the box. We took this out, tried to swap it over with an O2M, and it's just not happening. The only other kind of downside with this gearbox that I've noticed is there's no speed sensor. So I'm not bothered, because I'll just put a GPS speedo in, or you could get a speedo that works off of a magnet which you put on your shaft, and or you can work it out that way. So I'll put something in like that, like an ACEWELL or a GPS, one or the other. I need to look into legalities of GPS, because I'm not 100% sure they're kind of E-marked and road legal, but one way or the other, we'll get a speedo. It just ain't going to work off the box. ABS should run off the ABS rings. So yeah, it's kind of only the speedo that'll probably be the problem. Again, I could go for a different gearbox, but I don't want to. More importantly to me is the ratio at the gearbox, as opposed to whether I've just got to put in an aftermarket speedo. So yeah, job's good. I don't think it's too much work. But yeah, next video, I'm going to kind of show you what I'm doing with the mounts on this side. But from what hopefully some of you will be pleased to see, and I am as well, is the mount on this side can be done with OEM parts. And it's the same casting, I believe, as the 1.8 turbo. So all these people spending silly money on mounts and stuff, it's whether or not, I mean, to be honest, you can do it with aftermarket bits, which is probably easier. But for those of you like me that want to do it, maybe it's going to cost me more, but it's going to be a better way of doing it, is OEM mounts, and then better quality kind of top mounts, as opposed to just using the Lupo or Arosa stuff. But yeah, it shouldn't be too hard. So I'll crack on as soon as I've got a jack. But that's me for today.